art is the way we process the human condition.
Yes.
War, famine, love, divorce, breakups, having a new baby, everything we can imagine a movie where we've seen something like that happen. So it's an extremely powerful medium.
And the Greek tragedies and the Shakespeare, those are all human conditions that are still as relevant today. We're seeing more of this work come forward to help us see ourselves in a lower risk way and to be able to synchronize with each other about what's meaningful and what's important and what we take away.
So we bring the world in through something called the central executive network, but the way we process that information is through something called the default mode network.
This is an area of the brain that's only been recently explored, in large part by a neuroscientist named Ed Vossel. What we know about the default mode network is it's seen or believed to be the neurobiological basis of the self. It processes your incoming sensory information when you're quiet. So it's the place between the notes where you're still. It's also the meaning-making place where you connect the dots and make sense of the world. It's this place where you daydream, where you mind wander, and where you think to yourself. It's also the place where you know what you like and don't like, and what you think is beautiful and not. So in other words, you really are what you experience.
And how is art then a portal to the default mode network?
Maybe to start with this idea around creativity and flow and being a master at something and judging what you do, that actually starts in the prefrontal cortex, where if you're learning how to be a great artist, you're interested in mastery and practicing that skill. And that's prefrontal. But if you want to move into a creative flow state, you don't have to be a great artist to do that. What you need to do is turn off that judgment part of your brain, right? The part that says, you got to get better at this, you got to get better at that. And we have been taught early on that the only way that you should be doing art is if you're good at it, if you have a natural talent, right? Otherwise, we're shamed or told by third grade, it's not worth your time, there's nothing there for you, move on. In that creative flow state, you're in the process. So it's not about the product, it's not about the object, it's about what you're gaining through that process.
First, Charles asks Chris to perform a memorized piece.
Now that memory means you're going to do the memorized lyrics the way you originally wrote them, okay?
Okay.
Memory.
Boss.
Next, he gives him a prompt and asks him to improvise, to create a new original piece on the spot.
He doesn't know what's coming, and that's going to be his cues for that.
Freestyle. Physicist, lyricist.
Prefrontal cortex that appears to be linked to effortful self-monitoring seem to be turning off, deactivating in a pretty intense way in these highly trained professional musicians when they start improvising.
So in some sense, by letting go, by decreasing activation in the prefrontal cortex, we can sort of gain control of our lives in a way.
In fact, if you're too self-conscious and you're unable to relax and let go, you can't do something like this. When you start trying to put conscious control mechanism, your performance goes down.
So would you say this goes to any activity, really? If you're a professional tennis player, or if you're trying to do a physical activity, that the more you're able to practice letting go, once you've learned the skill, the better you'll be.
Exactly. Free throw shooters that are able to shoot 99% free throws, all of a sudden, when you tell them you're going to get $1 million if you make the next one, then all of a sudden you inject conscious control over something that's much better just left to its own subconsciousness, and then your performance gets worse and you're more likely to choke.
Surprisingly, the parts of your brain that are usually in control can get in your way. Your prefrontal cortex, the decision maker, can make you overthink something you've done 1,000 times.
So it's much more about the journey than simply the destination, the actual participation in the process.
And art is one of the highest forms of mindfulness. And actually, Sharon Salzberg, who was big in the mindfulness movement, told us that, especially for those who can't sit and think of nothing. If you sit and you're in that flow state, it is meditative.
I can't meditate because my mind tends to blank. Right?
So,
direct it.
Right. So the idea is give your mind something to do, but something to do that you're like, you could doodle, you could fill in a coloring book. You could take a lump of clay and just start to mold it. Just getting yourself out of that frontal lobe cognitive mind and into this other place is a form of mindfulness and meditation.
The default mode network goes to work when you're not creating, when you're not bringing that work in. It goes to work when you are quiet. So, in this very fast-paced world we live in, we often don't just stop and let our brains process. And you know how sometimes you're in the shower and you have a really great idea and you're talking to yourself? It's because you're really just in that sort of in-between space. And you're daydreaming, you're mind wandering, you're really allowing the default mode network to come online to process all of that sort of sensorial information. And so I think the takeaway is that if we don't allow ourselves to hit pause, we're not going to really be able to truly know ourselves. So we're just going to keep reacting as opposed to responding or reflecting or having insight, right? The default mode network is about looking inside. It's not about all the external stuff.
We can get thrust into something called the default mode, which is the mind-wandering part of the brain. That's where a lot of problem solving occurs, and music can put you reliably into that mode where you're not in control of your thoughts. They're sort of meandering. Reading can do that. Sometimes you're reading and you find that after a couple of pages, your eyes were moving, but you don't really know what you read. That's the mind-wandering mode. It's a healthy place to be. It's the opposite. It's kind of like a teeter-totter, a seesaw with what we call executive control, where you're deliberately paying attention. You're trying to get your job done. You're working. And, whatever work you do, you're focused. That focused attention depletes glucose in the brain. Glucose is the fuel of the brain. It depletes your fuel. And after a certain amount of time of working really hard, your brain starts to wander. And if, like many people, you reach for another cup of coffee to bring you back on task, it's actually counterproductive. You should let your mind wander for 15 minutes. And effective people will take a mind-wandering break, either at work or wherever they are, not while you're driving, but you pull over. And if you have a difficulty flipping that switch from paying attention to letting your mind wander, music is a very effective way to do that. My colleague Vinod Menon and I at Stanford were the first to show that music activates this mind-wandering mode, and we showed where the switch is in the brain, in a part of the brain called the insula, which is about 2 inches below here, deep inside the brain. It's a neurochemical switch that takes you from one to the other. One of the reasons it's a problem-solving mode, this default mode, is because if you could solve a problem easily by just connecting the dots, you would do it by paying attention. It's the difficult problems that require that something nonlinear, that you think outside the box, you connect things that hadn't been connected before. Those are the difficult problems. That's why you're walking down the supermarket aisle looking for Cheerios, and suddenly a solution comes to you. Your mind's been wandering. A lot of problem solving happens in the minds of listeners, and it happens in the minds of writers. Songwriters, whether you're a professional songwriter or not, you're working out your emotional problems, emotional tensions, a fight at work, and stuff just comes out.
I write a lot of grants. I write a lot of papers for my work. And if I'm just having writer's block or I'm just trying to work through an idea, I'll go and just sit and improvise at the piano or play some songs that I know for half an hour or so. And that really it kind of resets my brain. And I think it may wake my brain up quite a bit too. Just sitting at the piano for half an hour and just banging something out will completely reset my thinking, and I'll come back and the ideas come to me.
I'm curious how you can build that association to help you enter flow state more, because whether it's playing or listening to it, we all seek that state where we have a lack of self-consciousness, where we kind of disappear into our work, into what we're doing. And we've heard and we've experienced in our lives, but great athletes and musicians. I love that scene in the movie Soul where everything disappears and it's just him floating at the piano. And music for me is one of the strongest access points into that outside of just a more formal meditation practice.
Absolutely.
What's actually happening in that flow state?
Our EEG data shows we have provider surgeons, they come and become our experimental subjects. We see an increase in theta brainwaves, which is associated with creativity. So to enter flow state for a musician will be very different. The demands will be very different, and the conditions will be very different versus for a listener, right? If you're, writing an essay, writing a grant, or you're performing surgery, and you're putting music on as a background to entrain your brain to go into flow state. So for going back to the surgeon side, let's say they have very heavy mental loading going on, right? They may be coming in the middle of a very busy day of having to do 2-3 surgeries. So the music helps them going to deactivate from that state and tap more into what we also have seen is they tap more into areas like the parietal region of the brain, which is with multisensory integration. And the insula, right? Although EEG cannot monitor deeper brain regions like the amygdala, we have done also fMRI studies like the one in surgeons, the one I mentioned earlier to you. But for musicians to enter this experiential fusion state, which is very elusive, but it's really incredible when you really lose track of time. So several conditions have to be met. So one is you have to have full command of what you're doing on the technical level. So it becomes mostly muscle motor memory driven. And you almost have to reduce that level of meta awareness, which actually I know through meditation, we try to achieve that, where you become hyper aware of everything.
Metacognition, aware that you're aware.
Right. So that's actually not a good thing for musicians when we're trying to go into flow state, because then a lot of these minute hyper-technical details become very evident. You notice, the way your fingers are moving. Almost like I remember when I was little, learning to write Chinese characters, which could have many, many strokes. If you stop to see the whole character as an image, as a whole, as a totality, and you start to focus on the individual details, you lose track of how to write that character. So that happens during performance. Then you also want to be in tune with the environment as well. So that's the difference between practicing in the practice room, which, you could get into flow state, but it's not as wholesome of a flow state as you would get when you have an audience. So that live energy actually helps, and it helps me a lot. Some of the best, most memorable moments where I experienced this experiential fusion, which is a form of flow state, was during live concerts.
I think psychedelics are a way to get to a different state of consciousness, a different state of mind. But the arts are also a pretty effective way to get to a different state of mind. And we're doing a study at Hopkins right now looking at 4 different types of music and sound. One is autobiographical, one is indigenous culture, another is kind of a random playlist, and then the 4th is different sort of nature sounds. And what we think is going to happen is, to your point about hearing a song and remember being in Florida or the Keys, and we have songbooks of our lives that are incredibly meaningful for us. And our hypothesis is that using those playbooks, we're going to be able to elicit a heightened sense of consciousness that we think is going to activate similar parts of the brain that plant-based medicine does. And that makes a lot of sense, because if you think about trance and people dancing into trance or drumming into trance, we can get to trance. We can get to these different altered states through these different experiences, like Ivy was talking about, optimizing sensory systems using technology. That's another way to get to these different heightened aesthetic states. So that there are many ways to start with an induction, an experience, and then an integration. And I think you were talking about that earlier, this idea of what's that arc of how do you integrate this experience so you're pulling the pieces together for sort of whole health. It's another word for that is integration.
Which is so important, because I think having some of these transformative experiences without the integration, I see some people that are using it for amusement or social, and it's much too precious. I think you need that integration.
Another reason that this work is so vital right now is we're all really searching for connection, new connection, meaningful connection, and also trying to heal. And that's what the arts have always done, through ritual and routine and ceremony and all those things that are found in every culture.
What I can speak to as a piano teacher and a pianist is that the trance part is so true. Honestly, I know students probably will roll their eyes, but playing scales can get us in a trance. And because we're already skilled, it's just finger memory, and we no longer have to think actively about it. So there's this continual flow of just playing, and it's actually very soothing. A lot of my older students, I gave them some prompts to play scales in a connective way, so they can just enjoy a cycle of one key to another, and it really puts us in a trance. And one of my former students told me it's soothing for her to play scales.
John Coltrane, I know, is a hero of yours. What do you think is inside him that allows him to improvise like he does night in and night out?
So I think John Coltrane had a very specific, obsession with fundamentals. So he was known after a gig to go home and practice. After he's been playing for 5 hours on stage, he goes home and does scales. Somebody like that who understands the basics are where all the ideas come from, who's studying scales even though he's already a master. That was very, I think, illuminating to me, and not just scientifically, but also musically, because it made me realize that, oh, the better you are, the worse you are. And the more you know, the more you have to get back to basics, which is why today, as a surgeon, I kind of understand that idea, because the more I've been doing surgery now for decades, and I'm starting to see the appeal of very basic movements executed perfectly. You won't really see them as any kind of complex surgical outcome. They're not the sexy things that surgeons talk about, but they're the basic things like tying a knot, where I see a certain aesthetic thing to it. And I think that must have been what Coltrane felt when he kept going back to the basics and kept pursuing some sort of perfection.
And then of course too, when we play music, as we heard from the experts, when we're actually learning a piece, we need prefrontal cortex. Then after the practice, and a lot of musicians, you can see they're in a trance when they perform. Why? That's because the frontal cortex gets shut down. And then it's just the flow and the energy of music that we become one with. And then that is what expresses itself. And that's what the audience feel from a lot of musicians. There are some videos of how pianists can be in a trance state of sort of a dream world and even cry while they play. And it is all because of that trance state that we have learned to get into. And another word for it is flow state.
When you listen to good pianists, and most of the pianists who get to awards are at least quite good pianists, when you really do fall in love with something, as I did, it was magic right from the first notes. And then I was thinking, wow, can this be sustained? And, by the end of the piece, I thought, wow, I was in a dream state the whole time. I wasn't thinking about dynamization or pedaling or touch or rhythm or anything. I was just transported. And I'm quite a sucker for that when it happens. It doesn't happen very often in life. And I remember when Kate played the opening arpeggio, I don't even remember exactly what she did. It was like, wow, that's just beautiful sonority. Listen to that. And rational mind immediately said, how's the next chord going to be? And it was just gorgeous. And then I thought, well, how's she going to get through the rest of the thing and then begin the tune? A performer sets up a whole series of expectations like a composer does, except it's the performer's personality. So I was listening to what she was doing with that. And it's like, okay, she set a high bar for herself already. How's she going to keep it? And then after about one or two or three phases, I was no longer thinking of what she was doing. I was just listening to glorious music and, probably the best performance of that piece I'd ever heard live.
People talk about that hypnotic quality. The way I would put it, Kate, is for me, you're like the most patient pianist I've heard. Do you feel this patience when you're playing? I mean, is that something that you consciously are cultivating at the instrument or in your interpretations and your conceptions?
While I'm playing, I tend to enjoy a lot of the silences. And I find that in those moments, there's something very magical just about the music itself, and not really about how I'm playing it or anything. But as long as I'm enjoying those, then it feels something at least authentic is coming out.
Did somebody show you that? Did you figure it out? Like, when did that kind of start becoming a concept for you at the piano?
All of it really comes from the ear first. From that, the pearly tones, the deep sounds, the more intense sounds, at some point when you've thought about it enough, you've really wanted it enough, then it just sort of happens.
There's so many notes to have to account for. We do often just feel like, oh, I need to worry about the next one, and we don't enjoy the one we just played. So
it is very difficult. I have to say that it takes a lot of time to sort of get there and want it and everything. So, it's not to say that everything that I'm saying is very easy and I sort of just, one day drop my hands on the keys and it just happened miraculously.
Does that feel like a spiritual experience for you?
It does. It does. And it's you really become, as cliche as it sounds, you become one with the music, and you don't feel these the physicality of the music.
Yeah.
So
you're not playing the music as much. The music is sort of playing
and
you.
You become an embodiment of the music. Yeah, exactly. Of the music itself. And some of our audience members also, the listeners of these concerts, have told us that, they really forget they just came from a chemotherapy appointment. So it's very beautiful when we get to connect and hear their experience.
And if we pull up the brain map right now, what's happening to the different parts of my brain that are lighting up or down-regulating when you play a piece like that, as it has different movements?
I want to preface your question by saying there are very different modes of listening, right? We have the type of background listening. If you're dining in a fancy restaurant, you have background music. But then we also have intentional and mindful listening. So to receive the full benefits of a piece like that, where it really has a very clear narrative arc and has a lot of emotional modulations, lots of different mood states. So you have to imagine it's, the demand is similar to watching a movie. So you need to give it at least comparable amount of attention as you would to watching a movie that you set the time to do, rather than just, doing other tasks. And so that piece is called Ballade in B minor by a romantic composer called Franz Liszt. And I chose that because it really demonstrates the full range of mood states and very polarized emotions that the music will invite you to experience through this journey. And it's different from tuning to, I love in my free time, listen to a lot of jazz, and we talked about this before. Also, I have a very eclectic taste in music, whether it's Bill Evans, Billie Eilish, Bob Marley, David Bowie. I love them all. But this piece that you heard, it has a really distinct narrative arc. So you may hear, I'm curious, did you hear the theme coming back several times? There's this angelic element.
Yeah. And then
almost like a call from heavens.
And then returning back to like the kind of
the tumultuous,
stormy.
Very stormy, very tumultuous. So through that, your body goes between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. And also on a neuro side, you may drift between the default network going through salience into the executive network. Maybe some moments you really don't like, or you find it too invasive, which is all very normal. And these reactions will shift as you get familiar. That was your first exposure to the piece, right? Yeah. And the amount of dopamine, endorphin, or the serotonin surges, they may differ depending on if this is your first time listening or your 10th and 20th time. So if going on the neurotransmitter side, if you are familiar with the piece, and if you recall, towards the end, there's that very triumphant climactic section. Yeah. So if your brain anticipate at the arrival of that section, it could produce a very massive hit of dopamine that may be even comparable, not quite like, that's induced by drugs, but higher than eating your favorite piece of chocolate. So you've heard of the chills, right? The goosebumps you could.
Yeah, I got chills. I definitely think it was stronger than chocolate. Somewhere between chocolate and MDMA.
Okay. Wow, I'm so happy to hear that. But the really cool aspect, I think most people may be surprised to hear, is that, your sensitivity to this type of stimulation actually increases over time. So when you become more familiar with the music, unless if there's a traumatic memory tied to it, right? If say you have a healthy relationship with a piece of music or something, and as you cultivate the relationship throughout your lifetime, you become more attached to it, and so you can fall more and more in love with the same piece of music. So you become more sensitized to it, and then your tolerance actually decreases. That's the opposite mechanism for almost any other type of experiential stimulation you can get, which is really unique.
Appreciating music purely as a form of relaxation or entertainment does a massive disservice to all the things that music helps you with. Let's list them. Music can bring people together. The biggest draw to mental health is loneliness. You don't have to actively make music with somebody else. Just to listen to music plugs you into a social network, because every note of music is social. It's formed of social conventions. Music lowers stress by reducing cortisol. It gives you pleasure, makes you happy by flooding the brain with neurotransmitters like dopamine. Music is an excellent way of tagging memories, remembering the past. Music is a fantastic way of expressing your deepest emotions and your identity, which can't be captured by language. Why is that? Because music is far too precise for words to capture what's going on. And there's a reason why teenagers, imprint their taste in music with songs they learn at that time, because music has always come to define identity of who you are. All these things, increase your mental health, and ultimately, music becomes a mode of mindfulness, of contemplation. it's not purely relaxing because there's too much going on when you're listening. And the word relaxation gives a sense of passivity, whereas to listen is a very active and creative activity. Music, of course, can also harm the brain. It can be militarized, as we know from examples of Guantanamo Bay, when the army plays certain kinds of music to inmates. As a rule, any sound you dislike can harm you. So I may be into metal, but you might not be. So if I play metal very loudly, that will increase your stress levels. And similarly, much as we know about the health benefits of music, you have to be extremely cautious in how you prescribe it clinically. So for instance, Alzheimer's patients don't do well listening to Baroque music. It's too repetitive for them. And certain conditions respond better to softer music or to music with greater variety. If you're suffering from depression, then you don't want to hear a kind of music which reinforces that condition. So it's fine to argue for music to be a prescribed drug, but you have to educate the doctors in the kinds of music to prescribe.
Another kind of movement disorder is stuttering.
And it's mostly in boys.
It is mostly in boys. We don't really know why, but it's an inability to speak smoothly. And we think, again, it has to do with timing circuits and an internal clock gone awry. And music kind of hijacks the system with a steady tempo.
Isn't that helpful for people such as yourself, professional neuroscientists, to one day find a way to get inside the brain and fix that problem?
Well, we are inside the brain now. My colleague Eddie Chang and my other colleague Bob Knight, both in California in the San Francisco Bay Area, have implanted arrays of electrodes inside.
I'm ready for that to fix everything.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's astonishing what it's doing. So the way this happens is that there are people with epilepsy, which is uncontrolled electrical activity that causes seizures. Some of them volunteer to be in our experiments. And from that, we can do in humans what we've been doing for 100 years in animals, which is to measure from single cells at a time. And so, it's not far off where we will figure out where the stuttering cells are and maybe be able to treat it.
Treat that. Wow. And how about Tourette's syndrome?
Yes.
Yeah. Tell me about that.
Tourette's disease is debilitating. It in almost every case is accompanied by tics, unwanted motor movements, facial tics and body jerking. It's often thought of as the disorder in which people swear uncontrollably, but that's not present in all the cases.
I read somewhere that was the rarest of the.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, is that right?
That's the rarest of Tourette's, where people actually swear uncontrolled. The tics, and often what they do is make sounds.
Yes.
Instead of swearing, they're like, whoop!
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
That's
right.
Something like that.
Music can help that too?
It seems so. We're talking about a collection of anecdotes, and the plural of an anecdote is not data.
Okay. That's a good line.
That was a very good line. I like that.
That's a good line.
But there are a number of cases that, from anecdotes come studies. So the case of Billie Eilish is a perfect example. Popular contemporary singer. She has Tourette's, and she finds that when she's singing, the Tourette seems to go away. Seems to, because she's not keeping a log, she's not being observed and monitored. But from these observations of people like Billie Eilish and others, grant applications will go into the NIH. I'm part of a panel that's been working with the NIH and the White House
National
Science
Institutes
Office.
of Health.
Yeah. Francis Collins has been a big promoter of this work.
Though no longer head of NIH, is that correct?
He's been in the White House Science Office now.
Okay,
yeah.
got it.
And he's working on eradicating Hep C, but he convened a meeting of 50 scientists in D.C. last December on music and medicine.
Oh.
And he entrusted me to help him choose the scientists who would be there. We also invited professional musicians.
Do you get to tap some of that budget that's allocated to non-traditional medicine?
Yeah, so there's an Institute for Alternative and Complementary Medicine, and Emmeline Edwards runs the place, and she is terrific.
Because the NIH has a budget line.
Oh, they do
for that.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, so but it's also the National Institute for Neurological Disorders and Stroke, the NIA, the Addiction Agency, National Cancer Institute. I think most of the 26 institutes now are interested in music as medicine. For one thing, because it's potentially a huge cost saver, and the best example of economy is this: if you go to get surgery, it's likely that in the pre-operating theater, they're going to give you Valium, a benzodiazepine, to relax you before they anesthetize you, because knocking you out and relaxing you are two different things. They're not the same thing. That Valium that might cost $5 at the CVS on the corner, or the Duane Reade or whatever, in a hospital, the average cost is, you know what? $750.
Oh.
Same pill.
Same pill.
You've got compliance, you've got regulations, you've got all kinds of reporting that needs to be done, and you've got
overhead.
It's ridiculous. But a number of studies have now shown that if you play people relaxing music that they themselves chose, this is an important point, you can't foist music therapy on somebody using music they don't like. that has the opposite effect.
You've done studies with during open brain surgery playing.
It's a new trial during awake craniotomy. We're trying to measure the effects simultaneously.
Both with the surgeon and patients.
The surgeons and the patients. So,
fascinating.
So to my knowledge, it's the very first study of its kind. We're trying to capture, again, quantitatively, what the acoustic environment, how important it could be, because we don't know. Maybe people have looked at the effects separately, but not in the same setting.
If someone is sedated or even asleep, let's say they're in an environment that is completely silent versus something that's playing some of those lower resonant tones. I know, right now on YouTube, there's so many sleep tracks and solfeggio tones and different frequencies that people feel like they sleep better. It stays deeper in their sleep. I know it's early in the findings of the studies, but for those that are actually under surgery, I'm curious, can you share anything about what you're finding?
The control group is now receiving standard of care. So that could be, they could be, even in an unconscious state, they could be receiving communications, which sometimes could be stressful. If you hear a nurse talking about your case, blood pressure is spiking, and push more of this.
Because you're subconsciously picking it up.
You're still picking up. And now if we dilute that potentially stressful stimulus with something that's been shown, it's been demonstrated to be relaxing on a physiological level, and at least help mask it. And the music we choose, usually there's a little bit of a narrative, so it can help transport the system, the brain into, if you want to call it a meditative state. And so it provides a healthy escape.
Yeah.
And so we found that in those participants, they may have never ever attended a classical concert before. So they're not familiar with this genre of chamber music. They don't know who Beethoven or Brahms are, but they actually report the highest level of anxiety, stress reduction, which is very interesting. And females benefit a bit more. So there is a little bit of a gender difference. Females in waiting areas are more prone to elevated levels of anxiety. So, and going back to, remember when I said females are a little bit more primed acoustically versus visually for male.
It's a completely side tangent, but I saw someone share something on Instagram that kind of resonates with that, because men fall in love with what they see and women fall in love with what they hear, which is why men lie and women wear makeup or something.
I have that. Yeah. That's right. Right. So I tell my friends, right, especially those that are not in this area, you really should cultivate a very mindful acoustic environment or soundscape, if you have your love interest over.
Getting the tips.
You get all these powerful cocktail of neurotransmitter releases.
Yeah.
And you don't have to buy a cup of coffee or an alcoholic drink to do that.
You can be subconsciously lowering their CRP and boosting their endorphins. And so fascinating. But to go back to 32% reduction, this is a different study than the 16 compositional elements? Or
that was a study designed to validate. So we isolated these individual parameters in music. You may be familiar with tempo, some of the more basic elements that were in prior literature.
Yeah.
But my team went above and beyond. So we really tried to quantify all of these additional variables. Timbre, interpretation, or flexibility, rubato in the music. So rubato is a very unique feature for music. It's related to rhythm. And so if we think of heart rate variability, right, which is a critical indicator of your wellness, before and during the pandemic, before someone was about to get sick, in the 48-hour window prior to that, you would notice a significant drop, up to 40% sometimes in HRV. So if you think of
which
rubato,
heart rate variability is like the variance in between the space between your heartbeats.
That's right. So the more flexible,
the more resilient.
The more resilient, exactly. Yeah. In musical performance, if we have a MIDI file, something that's computer generated or AI generated, you lose that flexibility, or you lose the variance completely.
That's really interesting. I would be curious if you ran the same trial with AI generated music and see what the percentage in reduction of the cortisol that you're picking up in the plasma would be, because I definitely can feel it. Like, AI is fundamentally predictable, like trained off large models in the internet of what's essentially the average. And so it doesn't leave space for that humanity and that imperfection that really connects with people.
But just going back to what you were saying about you want a little bit of surprise to keep the brain trained. So what's effective or what's magical about some of these classical compositions we use is it's a perfect mix of familiarity. You do hear the theme return, so it brings that sense of comfort, even if you don't know the piece, right? Usually within that frame, the structure, you have the re-encounter of the theme, which brings the familiarity. But then every time it comes back, especially if it's a variation form, a little bit of novelty variations are introduced. Mozart may add a little trill or a little cadenza here and there. So our brain likes these little thesis, and that translates to elevated dopamine surges. If you play something that's very monotonous and completely predictable, it becomes, it can almost cause anxiety, especially if it's in a repetitive loop. Let's say in these environments we put, first of all, lyrics could be very emotionally triggering and potentially in a negative way, especially if there's a memory trigger that may be traumatic. So we usually avoid using vocal music in these more critical care settings. But also the length of a typical song, right? That's in other genres, they're usually 2 to 3 minutes on average. But we could carve out these slightly longer narratives with the classical music that we use. So again, to avoid repetition, but also to have that familiarity. And on the familiarity and comfort front, another element of the data we found to be very exciting is there was a 28% increase in the levels of oxytocin, also detected in the blood using proteomics, metabolomics. So oxytocin was the other neurotransmitter. It's a bonding hormone, and it's usually secreted when really a sense of comfort. So it's a very hard environment if you think of the preoperative setting. The patient's about to have their brains operated on. So it's a very high agitation state. So to be able to see that increase signals that the music was really able to help calm the system and bring them into, activate the parasympathetic nervous system and deactivate the sympathetic nervous system.
What's the difference if you take the same melodic structure, play it through a cello, through a violin, someone sings it, you play it on piano? What's the difference in terms of the impact on biology?
So we had the exact same piece, and we chose the Rachmaninoff vocalist. It's a very beautiful melodic work. So we had maybe 7 or 8 different versions, exactly as you described. Also, we have vocal, soprano and alto, we have different singers, and on French horn, so on a multitude of instruments. So we preserve all these other variables and isolating that single variable, which is essentially timbre, right, or instrumentation. So that's when we found the cello and middle lower range of the piano, which, if you look at the vibrational frequencies, they align to the natural range of a mother's soothing voice. So those were perceived and selected in the responses to be most relaxing in the over 300 participants.
That makes sense, especially for, in the yogic traditions too, any chanting or mantras and the using of your own voice to create that sort of
vibration.
Yeah, that vibration that's soothing. And then so the higher ones
were activating? While, if the purpose is not... So I'm talking about relaxation right now, where the clinical aim is to downregulate the stress response, right? So we're trying to avoid music that may be overly stimulating and very intense. If you think of the very intense vibrato in the upper register of a violin or the sound of a piccolo, it could be overly emotionally invasive. And also the human voice as well, especially if you may not, when words are introduced, the brain mechanisms are completely different. And it's also more exerting and taxing, which means less relaxing for the brain to accept and process all that stimuli. So instrumental music is a little bit now more non-invasive.
Yeah.
Yeah, plasticity of the brain is one of the discoveries recently that's really led to so much more understanding about why things work. My favorite is melodic intonation therapy, which does a similar thing. It transfers speech to singing. And with one session with a music therapist, someone who's had a stroke or traumatic brain injury can regain speech.
So, speech. Let me tell you a story about another little girl. I met her when she was 3 years old. A physical therapist friend of mine who works over at Siskin Rehabilitation Hospital called me up and said, "You got to come over here and see this kid." She had hydrocephalus. She was legally considered blind deaf and cerebral palsy. This 3-year-old who couldn't see and couldn't hear, they sat her down at a piano, and I saw her do... picking out all the F's on the piano. How could a child who couldn't see and couldn't hear do that? And I thought, this is a remarkable kid. She was very medically fragile, so it took 2 years to do that, and we started working with her on this. I kind of worked tactile with her hands, and then 3 or 4 weeks later, the song would pop out and she'd start to play it. And again, the same thing happened with her with the singing. She had kind of like her own little language, but suddenly some English words were popping out. But unfortunately, she had a seizure 9 months later, and she was put into hospice at this point, which was horrible for all of us. And so I asked her mother, I said, do they know what happened? Well, evidently her oxygen levels were down way too far and they couldn't bring her oxygen up. Ask her doctors if we can work with her. We spent the summer having her play drums out like this so that she could bring her chest up, and harp, and singing. And the singing was the key on this girl. It was amazing. This girl developed a set of iron lungs. You could hear her singing 2 blocks away. Unbelievable. And as she sang, her oxygen levels came up. And guess what? 10 months later, she was out of hospice. They remained up. So this is the power of speech with singing and music. Music is multi-hemispheric, and so it can reach into all kinds of areas that we wouldn't think about. So think about the possibilities on this. We could take a child with autism, or even a neurotypical child, who was trying to learn the alphabet, and they're like A, C, B, but suddenly they hear, and suddenly A, B, C, D, E, F, G makes sense, okay? Think about a woman who had a stroke. She's working on getting her left arm kind of rehabilitated, and one of her occupational therapy exercises is to reach up like this so that she can get to the counter effectively. And it's really difficult. But what if we just add rhythm to it? 1, 2, 3, 4. She's a lover of classical music. So then we add this to it. Up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down.
What makes human music so distinctive is our link between sound and motion, which is due to the connections in the human brain between the motor regions controlling our motion and the regions controlling hearing and sound, the auditory cortex. Birds, as a rule, don't have that link, with the possible exception of sulfur-crested cockatoos. So as long as you want to go back, there is this link between rhythm and motion. If you rock a baby to a particular rhythm, that baby will come to like that particular rhythm. We also love to imitate rhythm, and that's due to the existence of mirror neurons in our brains. So when the brain sees an action, a physical action in somebody else, you don't have to move to experience that motion in your brain, because the mirror neurons are responding sympathetically. We've always had an instinctive faculty to imitate. We call it mimesis. And we see that in all walks of life. Yawns are contagious. If I see you yawning, I yawn back. But also emotions are contagious. If you're sad, I instinctively cleave to your sadness. I mirror it. I emote with you. And that's the same with music. When I feel sad, when I hear a sad song, my body, my mirror neurons are instinctively sympathizing. I'm mimicking, I'm mirroring the human sadness encoded in that sad song. Another vivid example of emotional contagion, which is related to our mirror neurons vibrating sympathetically to the perception of somebody else moving. I once attended a concert and with my infant toddler, and there were 1,000 toddlers all jumping up and down instinctively to the sound of the orchestra playing the Lone Ranger. Now, they'd never heard the Lone Ranger before. It's the William Tell overture by Rossini. But I had an instinctive response to that rhythm, and we're born for that. And even when you do an experiment on babies who aren't sitting on their parents' knees, so you could perhaps argue that it's the parents who are prompting their children to jump up and down, they do the same thing. So it's within the baby, not within the adult.
Same piece of music, even if they're not together, their brain waves literally synchronize. The brain activity is synchronized in time and in the regions of the brain. We're literally on the same wavelength. And if we're in the same room with people while we're listening to music together, say in a concert, not only are the brain waves synchronized, but we're experiencing an exchange of oxytocin, this hormone that binds us together as a people. Oxytocin played a role in ancient prehistory, in caveman days, where we would sing around the fire all night to ward off predators or a neighboring angry tribe, and we became bonded to one another. It's the reason that armies have marches. It helps them to feel more cohesive.
In January 2023, classical pianist Yuja Wong pulled off the impossible.
I played 5 Rachmaninoff concertos with Philadelphia Orchestra in Carnegie in one go. Yeah.
That's right, it was the Rachmaninoff Marathon. All 4 piano concertos, plus the Rhapsody on a Theme of Paganini, played in a single performance at Carnegie Hall with the Philadelphia Orchestra led by Yannick Nézet-Ségué.
Apparently that's the first time that ever happened in the history of piano.
Very true. This was completely unprecedented and insanely demanding. These 5 pieces include 2.5 hours of music, 621 pages of score, over 97,000 piano notes, and 1 outfit for each of the 5 pieces. This once-in-a-lifetime experience called for a once-in-a-lifetime experiment. We asked Yuja to put on a wearable device to track what happened to her heartbeats during the performance. And she actually agreed to it. So did Yannick, members of the orchestra, and even some audience. This is an experiment that reveals what happens when Rachmaninoff's music touches your heart. What about Yuja's theories on number of notes and speed?
It goes higher when there's more notes or faster.
Going into this whole thing, we all thought her heart rate would go up if she played a ton of notes really fast. But the data doesn't seem to prove this. The best example is this famously scary section in the third movement of Rock 3. It's called the black page because of how many 30-second notes cover it. Yuja's heart rate was the same playing this as this slower section just a minute later. So sheer physical exertion seem to not be tied to heart rate. If this is true, it makes sense. Skilled pianists conserve their energy through efficient body movement.
I think I'm quite economical. Extremely economical, but it's very misleading because the end of the piece I always like to do this, but most time they are on the keyboard and quite small movements.
And then do any of the concerti feel like more of a workout for you when you're playing?
I think it's the same.
This is your friendly reminder to take these assumptions with a grain of salt. Let's move on to this chart representing the average BPM per piece and the average BPM per movement per piece. Take a look right here. Yuja's heart rate was second lowest on average during the first piece, Rock 2. Crazy enough, Yuja's heart rate was lowest here than out of every movement in the concert. When asked if she was a stone cold boss for being less nervous at the start,
that's I don't know what to say about that. You found my secret. It's like an Iron Woman or something, or Poker Face. It is Russian music, so I'm good at Poker Face. I think also, Rock 2 is not my favorite, so I'm good at, keeping it slow and let it blossom.
Now here's Rock 3. It's the most physically crazy and longest of the concerti. And what's so amazing is that Yuja's heart rate was lowest on average during this piece. This not only supports the previous point about physical exertion, but it speaks to the effect that Rock 3 has on Yuja.
3 is have a calming effect for me, like a cool down.
Yuja definitely acted calm and cool when she had to flip the wearable upside down because the screen started flashing. But what's really interesting is right here. Yuja's heart was higher on average during Rock 1 and Rock 4, and she has the least experience playing these two pieces.
For Rock 4, I always prepare probably an hour or an hour and a half before, whereas for Rock 3, maybe like 10 minutes. Rock 2, I was bored.
Could it be that her heart rate was higher because she didn't play these as much? It's hard to be sure, but it is interesting. And what does Yuja's heart rate look like before and after she took the stage? Well, those finales were certainly exhilarating because Yuja's heart was beating faster after each piece than before. And check out the disparity in Rock 2. It certainly looks like she could play it in her sleep, given how low her heart rate was. And when we look at the more unfamiliar Rock 1 and Rock 4, we see her heart beating faster on average before she plays. So how did our conductor, Yannick, compare?
I worked so much harder than he did, because I had more chords. That's why he was bowing to me.
And while it looks like he burned less calories and took less steps...
You worked harder than me, that's true. But maybe if I did not work as hard, you would have worked even harder. That was our goal, and I think you felt free. So actually, that's the best compliment. Thank you, Yuja.
Here are his heartbeats compared to Yuja's, with this dotted line showing his resting heart rate. We immediately see Yannick's highest rate was 4 BPMs higher than Yuja's highest during the finale of the Rhapsody.
My God, by far. It's by quite far. That's so interesting.
That part is so loud from the orchestra. I'm just gonna shake my hand, nobody's gonna hear me.
And I'm just there rushing around to make sure that we keep up with her speed. So maybe that's why the BPM is the highest.
It's very, very exciting. It's almost like rock and roll, maybe.
And one of the coolest results from this entire experiment, we see a stunning synchronicity between Yuja and Yannick's heartbeats. They were feeling the music in similar ways.
wow, to see all of it going together. I'm very impressed by that.
It's really synced. That's why we like to make music. It's like your brainwaves really just thinking about the same thoughts. This is totally, what's that called? Telepathy. Yeah.
My entire life as a conductor is to bring people in sync. That's why I'm a musician and that's why I'm a conductor. And that's always my goal, but I never thought it would be reflected in really hard beats like this.
Wow, that's very parallel. 4, yeah, see, 4 is extremely integrated. Like, it's like playing chamber music. Everything depends on each other. It's not I'm accompanying him or the other way around. This is just very...
interdependent.
Yeah, exactly. And everybody, like, the string depends on the brass and I depend on the brass and strings, everybody. So if one person screwed up, we're all screwed. We're like in this one thing.
We think about emotion all the time. I felt on that concert that Yuja and I were on the same wavelength. It's very beautiful. I find it very moving.
Now I want to show you 2 case studies I think are very insightful. In the first movement of Rock 3, Yuja tackles the small cadenza, where she plays solo for over 1.5 minutes. Everyone else rests. Predictably, Yuja's heart rate gradually climbs all the way to the climax. It's the peak heartbeat of the entire movement. As Unique takes a break, we see his heart rate go down naturally. But then his heart also goes up slightly while Yuja's playing gets more intense. And not only Unique, but the orchestra and audience as well.
I find it very beautiful. I remember this moment also in the cadenza because it was the last concerto in the evening and I wanted her to nail it. And when you reach this peak alone, it was like you go girl. And maybe that's why my heart went with it.
Incredibly, even when no one in the orchestra is playing, the audience's heartbeats go up during emotionally intense sections. And when we check out the finale of Rock 3, the same appears to show itself here as well. The true impact of playing and listening to music is mystical, mysterious, and while this experiment was fascinating, the data can only tell us so much about what this music did to everyone that afternoon. And with no better music than Rachmaninoff's.
His music just have this way of moving your emotions. All of a sudden you're like listening, kind of just not even breathing and then just tears coming down. But this is just something even, you don't know what it is, it just like washes over you.
And the true impact of this experiment was apparent, because it seemed it left quite an impression on how she sees herself as an artist.
For sure, it's definitely my first time doing something like this. When I read the data, it's very surprising, unexpected. Lots of it for music for Rachmaninoff. Thank you for your awesome work.
Maybe we'll get Yuja to track her brainwaves at her next marathon.
There's an extreme reaction to music which has been called the chills or frisson or the sublime. There are moments in music which are so intense and they're often triggered by breakthrough moments of loudness or extremity. They're different for every person. It's interesting because you have the same parts of the brain which respond to that as response to fear, which is why the chills give you goosebumps or piloerection. The hairs on your skin literally stand on end like when you're getting goosebumps. But you enjoy this fear, and this is very strange. One of the definitions of musical aesthetics is that you learn to take the danger out of extreme experience. I have a similar experience when we go on a fairground ride or when we're watching a volcanic eruption in the safety of an observation platform. It's almost as if music is a violence without the danger, or the natural infinite, the natural sublime without the danger. Darwin was the first to observe that emotion had an adaptive role in the field, that animals and people, they experience emotions in relation to the goals which help them survive. So happiness is when you achieve a goal, anger is when the goal is blocked, sadness is when you lose a loved one, fear is the most archetypal emotion. When you're exposed to a threat from a snake, you have instinctive response to either freeze or to fight or to flee. And music is full of similar responses. Music is made of patterns, and patterns can either be allowed to run their course or they can be frustrated through shocks. And when we hear a shock in music, it can be a bang or the interruption of a pattern. That engages the same faculties in our brain as danger out in the field. Of course, nobody dies in music. This is only a derived effect of that. But this is why we think that music is able to express emotion in a very visceral way. And emotions are also processed at different levels of the brain, starting with the brainstem, which flinches to shocks, and then the reptile brain, the basal ganglia, responds to pleasure or displeasure. The mammalian amygdala responds to emotions, happiness, sadness, and the neocortex processes emotions through pattern. So when you're listening to music, it's a kind of mental time travel. You really are, when you're absorbed in a work, you're traveling back through layer upon layer of your brain, almost biologically, which is why I call music a sort of umbilical cord back to Mother Nature. It's mental time travel.